Welcome to our live stream on the Cliff's Edge channel on YouTube, the Worth Knowing Substack, and the Beyond Politics podcast. I'm Matt Robeson, and today we're talking about the story that's dominating the media, dominating Washington, the story that led the New York Times podcast this morning, the Politico podcast this morning, the Washington Post podcast. The list goes on and on. The question is, what should the media be doing about this? I'm talking, of course, about the allegations in Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson's new book that not only was former President Joe Biden not cognitively capable of doing his job, but that the people around him deliberately and knowingly hid the truth and thereby missed the chance, prevented the chance to avert the disaster that we're all now living through, the disaster of Donald Trump. The story raises a fundamental dilemma. On the one hand, these are legitimate issues. A president of the United States whose mental capacity and judgment are seriously impaired is a danger to everyone on earth. This is something Democrats have been making an argument about when it comes to Donald Trump for years, and we're right about that, by the way. So we can't very well pretend that the underlying issue isn't important, especially because it was such a major political liability in 2024. And if Democrats don't find a way to deal with it politically, it could easily continue to be a major liability in 2026 and 2028, especially with the entire right-wing media apparatus lined up to weaponize it. But on the other hand, as I wrote on Worth Knowing yesterday, there's a distinct odor around the story that's what's going on here. It's being weaponized. There's an odor around the timing of it, around the coverage of it. We've all seen this movie before where genetically engineered Franken media narratives on Whitewater, Benghazi, Nancy Pelosi's finances, long-form birth certificates, Swift boat veterans for truth, and other Republican basement headquarters lab creations get repeated and weaponized and used as weapons of mass distraction. Here's how Cliff Schechter put it on the Blue Amp Substack newsletter yesterday. It's about Jake Tapper writing this tome at this moment on the cognitive state of a guy who isn't freaking president while we deal with a maniacal numbnuts who is saying that he doesn't need to follow the Constitution. Trump's saddled us with a self-inflicted recession via Doge, deportation and illegal tariffs, actually horribly ignored the plight of Kilmar Abrego Garcia and is clearly just an ornament on Putin's Christmas tree. But sure, write a book about the former guy. Cliff's right about that. Republicans are leaning into the opening that this book has cracked wide open to do even more MAGA skullduggery. James Comer is using it right now to try to make a legal case against pardons that President Biden legally issued. The Trump administration is using it to question regulations that the Biden administration legally put in place. And this morning, Politico wrote that, quote, after years in which the cover-up theory was pushed only by the right wing, the media now concur that this is the prevailing narrative. Let me say that again. The prevailing narrative in the media is becoming that there was a cover-up. That certainly is a very convenient distraction for a president and his party who are in the midst of devastating Medicaid cuts, devastating the economy, destroying our alliances, and grifting to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars all around the world. So now we've ended up in the Princess Bride dilemma. Clearly, we can't choose the wine in front of you. Clearly, we can't choose the wine in front of me. They both have iocane powder in them. The media shouldn't fall into this trap, but they can't exactly ignore it. Democrats shouldn't fall into this trap, but we can't exactly ignore it either. So how should the media be talking about this? How should Democrats be dealing with it? How do we avoid having this story become the distraction from Trump that Republicans so desperately want it to be? There is literally no one better than I can think of to talk to about these questions, to ask these questions to, than one of the world's great experts on media, on American media, and especially how the media covered Donald Trump. Mark Jacob is a former editor at both the Chicago Tribune and the Chicago Sun-Times. That's like being featured at a bar that plays both kinds, country and Western. Mark, I'm just delighted to have you on and to throw these impossible questions at you.
Yeah, thanks for asking me. I think I'm, just to get started,
please.
I've got to say, I think it's a story. I mean, it's a story. To me, the biggest issue for me is how big a story and what kind of story it is. I mean, this is not, and also it's not particularly new. I mean, anyone who saw that debate knew that something was wrong. And the fact that it took him 3 weeks to get out after the debate showed that there was a lot of insularity, in his camp, that people were saying, Joe, stay in, when clearly he shouldn't have. So it's a story. But here's the thing, Matt. When an anchor at a major cable news channel writes a book, it's going to be overplayed by that news channel and probably by a lot of other people, because what you mentioned is 100% correct. I mean, there's a guy who is mentally disturbed in the White House right now, and it's not Joe Biden. And so, and job one of the news media right now is to warn the American public of the dangers of this horrible, dangerous president, and all of the people around him that are telling him it's okay for him to do all these cruel things to people.
Let's back up a little bit and drill down on, I guess, what's question number one. Let's talk about the Jake Tapper of all of this. Is this a legitimate exercise of journalism in your mind? If you were the editor and your journalist came to you and said, hey, boss, I'm thinking this is the book that I'm going to go off and write, what would you have said?
I would have said, okay, go ahead and do it. Any coverage we make on our news channel is going to be based on its newsworthiness, not whether you work for us. And I would, by the way, Jake, tell you that you're to a large extent, you're chasing last year's story, not this year's story. So that's what I would say.
And if we can stipulate that, all right, Jake is free. It's free country for the next 5 minutes. Jake is free to go off and write this book. But it doesn't mean, as you just said, that the media has to cover it based on newsworthiness. So now this book comes out and it's being covered. It's being reviewed. This is the third, and I guess what you'd call a trilogy of recent kind of examinations of the 2024 campaign. The others being focused much more on the Harris end of it. This one being focused almost entirely on President Biden's cognitive capacity. How would you have suggested that pick your Chicago paper of choice. How would you have suggested that they cover this book?
Cover the release of the book and those supposed revelations. Let's emphasize that a lot of these revelations are by blind sources, which are inherently weaker than named sources, and therefore, less credible. I believe it, but I mean, he's got, unnamed cabinet members, at least 3 of them named in the book, and all right. So this is the usual Washington game where, you're doing a lot of whispering without your name attached to it. And it's just less credible. So I guess if I were making the decision on how to play this story, it's not a page 1 story to me. I mean, it is a footnote to history story to me. And just to be really clear about something, while I think that the people in the White House now are incredibly dangerous, the most dangerous people that has ever inhabited the White House, the Democrats, are not they're just not like white knights on horses. They make a lot of mistakes themselves. Number one, they have the mistake of being pretending things are normal, and that they can engage in bipartisanship with fascists. They are still real petty about their own brand and their own reelection chances and their own fundraising. For example, explain to me why Cory Booker voted for the confirmation of Jared Kushner's father as ambassador to France, other than fundraising. Give me a good reason other than fundraising. Is it for the benefit of the American people? Is it for the people of France? Is it for world peace? No, it's for fundraising. And so even Democrats who act well sometimes seem to be involved in petty politics way too often. And this is an example of that. This is an example of Biden's ego getting in the way of what was best for the country.
I want to talk for a second about the substance of it. And this necessarily calls for a little bit of speculation, but it really bothered me the quote that I read at the top there from Politico. This was from this morning's playbook, which I try to read but not over pollute my brain with. And the sentence was, after years in which the cover-up theory was pushed only by the right, the media concurs. This is now the prevailing narrative. Again, I'm asking for rampant speculation, but hey, that's what we do. And I want to, by the way, as I always do, invite people who are commenting in the chat to please weigh in on this, because I want to be scientific about this. Can I rule out the possibility that there was an explicit conspiracy to say, all right, guys, we got to cover this up. We've got to mask all of this. Here's the plan. I can't rule that out. But I also think that this is one of those things where if I applied Occam's razor, it seems a lot more likely to me that there was a lot of road to hell paved with best intentions or fog of war aspect to this. And so I'd love to just kind of get your brain, and actually the whole community that's weighing in, people's brain on this. And what I'd like to do is, this is from the Washington Post review of the book. This is the opening 2 paragraphs. I'd just like to read this to you. In December 2022, Jon Favreau, a host of the massively popular liberal podcast Pod Save America, took his family to visit the White House. Favreau, former speechwriter for Barack Obama, had extensive connections within the Biden administration and brought his family along to visit his old stomping grounds. Technical note, it's stamping grounds. Any good editor should have seen that. Not stomping grounds. Not a thing, people. Anyway, going on. After a brief detour to say hello to a friend, Favreau went to his old office and was surprised to find President Joe Biden sitting there, charming his family. Not only that, the president had recognized Favreau's mother-in-law from a fundraiser she had attended years earlier. He soon invited the whole group to the Oval Office, where he regaled them with a blow-by-blow account of Supreme Court nominee Robert Bork's failed confirmation hearings in 1987. The president's staff seemed either blithely unaware that he was devoting a huge chunk of a weekday afternoon to story time or unwilling to intervene. But then again, Biden had always been a yapper. Next paragraph. In April 2024, so this is less than a year and a half later, Favreau visited the White House with his podcast co-hosts and several other influencers at a meet and greet the night before the White House Correspondents Association dinner. Biden was incoherent and frail. He kept telling stories that no one could understand. 16 months had passed, but he seemed to have aged a half century. An alarmed Favreau approached a White House aide, but his concerns were brushed off. The president was just tired. He was told it was the end of a long week. There was no reason for concern. 2 months later, Biden delivered the single worst performance in the 60-year history of televised presidential debates, dooming his re-election campaign, destroying his presidency, and essentially delivering the country to Donald Trump. To me, the Occam's razor explanation here is not what the media narrative has become. Remember, Politico is saying that the media narrative has become that there was a cover-up. To me, the Occam's razor explanation is it's awfully hard to tell, right? It's awfully hard to tell if you're getting little dribs and drabs. And this decline clearly happened, as documented in this book, extremely rapidly and unevenly.
Right. Well, definitely unevenly, Matt, because in March of 2024, he gave a really stirring State of the Union address, if you remember.
Absolutely.
So it's not. It's clearly it's a matter of judgment whether somebody's losing it or not. I mean, unless you're a doctor, then you're performing cognitive tests. I mean, you're seeing them in certain times, whether they're tired or not, and all this. And I'm with you. I think there might have been some conspiracy aspect to it, but I do think mostly it was denial. It was people who were loyal to Joe Biden and who thought that he was good for the country and thought that he was the best way, maybe the only way to defeat Trump. They thought they were in denial. They thought that it was worth it. You know, if he'd lost a few inches on his fastball, well, maybe he's still better than anyone else. And so I think that I don't think that it was some nefarious thing where we're trying to trick the American people into electing somebody who was completely unqualified for the job. I think it's more that they fooled themselves. They were into denial about whether he'd been slipping or not, and they still thought, even if he had been slipping just a little bit, that he was better than the alternative.
I want to just quickly address a couple of comments that have cropped up from people who have popped in here, questioning, are we doing an exercise of bashing Democrats today? Definitely not. Definitely not. I think what we're trying to deal with is the fact that Democrats are now confronted with this book and this media narrative. And, as I wrote in my Substack yesterday, um, it's a real issue. It's an important issue, but there's also the reek of Fox News weaponized bullshit in it.
Mm,
And that
yeah.
is a dilemma. It's a dilemma for the media. How do you cover something? Let me turn this into a question for you. So if you're here and you're concerned that we're doing a Democrats bashing exercise, we are not. I've been a professional, campaign operative and Democratic staffer for multiple decades. And I love my party, and I will criticize them occasionally the way you do members of your own family. Um, so how do you then deal with now you're back to Mark Jacob putting your editor hat back on. So now you're having your morning editorial meeting. This is the story that's dominating your sister and brother outlets. And you need to figure out, how do we cover this without falling into the right-wing trap? So how should they do it?
Well, I mean, you had her audio, came out, so you have that as just a fact. That's not like some blind source that Jake Tapper is quoting. That's that's something that Biden underwent an interrogation, and here it is. So you have that as a fact, not just somebody's opinion. So there are real facts that you can bring into it. And just really to emphasize, I don't think there's any dispute that Biden, was a diminished president by the end than he was at the start. I hope there's not any dispute over that, because it seems pretty obvious to me. And as far as, I just want to say one thing about the bashing Democrats thing. I would rather be truth oriented. I'm not like I'm not going to do what Biden's aides were doing, which is fooling themselves into having what they wished were true be true rather than what actually is. There's no question in my mind. Here's what I would say. He overperformed as president. He was a very good president. He certainly wasn't my first choice, in 2020. He was almost my last choice, but still way better than Donald Trump. Not even close. And he had a really successful presidency. I mean, in a lot of ways, you can just point to him. So it's not like anyone's trying to bash Biden, but I guess what I do is just in what I write in my Stop the Presses newsletter and other things that I write is just try to be fact oriented and truthful oriented and warn people about the dangers of fascism, because that's what we're seeing right now, an attempt to overthrow the democracy that we all love, or that decent people love. And so to me, that's the goal. Goal one is to defend that. And some Democrats are doing a great job of fighting back. Bernie Sanders, AOC, Chris Murphy, you can name a lot of them, who are really, J.B. Pritzker in my state, so there are a lot of Democrats who are doing a fantastic job, and don't bash them, I'd praise them. But there are others who are trying to, I think they're wishing for 1993 or something. They're not in the moment, and they're not being serious enough. And I'm going to criticize them for that. So it's not it's not Democratic bashing. It's just my opinion, and it's just what I think. I do think, but back to your question, I just think that you cover it in a factual way. And Jake Tapper's not like some kook. I mean, usually he has some facts behind him. So I don't think you just dismiss it. But you say both sides. The Biden side has gotten its chance to say. They had a very good response, by the way, Matt. They said that the book doesn't name one case when Biden was unable to handle a crisis. They don't name one case where he didn't step up to do what he had to do. And I think that's probably true. That assertion hasn't been rebutted by the Tapper people. And that's a real good point. I mean, so I think here's another thing, Matt, that I think people don't pay enough attention to. It's whether you put good people around you. And Biden put really good people around him. And we've seen who Trump puts around him. It's Pete Hegseth and Christy Nome, and I mean it's the worst people possible. Alina Habba and Judge Box of Wine, Janine Pirro. I mean, honestly, he's putting the worst people in America around him. So why would we? So it's a big issue if he's diminished because he's got no support system. He's just got more horrible people telling him to do horrible things. And whereas Biden, even a bit diminished, had really responsible, strong, intelligent people around him to help him. So I mean, so I think that lessens the danger we were facing in this case. But it still needs to be faced that he was a diminished president by the end.
I want to get to something in the comments from VD Hertz. That's Victor David, I believe. We picked up on this last week, and I'm going to get to this because it's kind of a question that's sort of a challenge to us, and I think is a good one. I think it's a good one and a productive one, and it goes right to this topic. I just want to, before I do that, I want to pick up on the thread you were just introducing. Of course, you had me at hello when it came to the value of smart staff. A few weeks ago, I had my former boss in Congress, Congressman Paul Hodes, on this show. And I love Paul. He's a good person. He has a great moral compass. He's extremely bright and, a former prosecutor. And he did a lot of good things in office. He also, like all of us, has human tendencies. He has strengths. He has weaknesses. He explicitly hired me as his chief of staff. He said this in the interview. I want someone who's going to help me accentuate my good points and, kind of help me cover over some of my weak points. That's your job as a staffer. So I'm not trying to over-aggrandize myself or the role of unelected staff, but I'm agreeing with your point that having people around you who you trust, you've given a tremendous amount of behind the scenes power to, is so critical. It's so important. And one of the functions, I would say this if Paul were right here. I mean, we did many functions for Paul as staffers that very kind of slippery slope-ish bleed their way into the kinds of positions that you could almost see coming from some of Biden's staffers. Paul would have a tendency to give loose quotes to the press. So we would try to give him hey, say it this way, maybe not this way, right? He would have a tendency to occasionally go off topic a little bit. He would admit that if he were here. And so we would just listen in, and then we would be on hand to follow up with reporters for any clarifications. You could see how that kind of staff support, which I promise you, every single member of Congress, every mayor, every governor, every single one, state senators, and certainly US presidents, they have people doing that function. If I were elected, I would have people doing that function for me because I know my weak points. I go on too long like I am right now. I need people to help me do that. All right. So, but that just took me back to the point that, to me, the Occam's razor explanation here is this was much more a slippery slope and maybe a little bit of a case of self-delusion. It's not necessarily a criminal offense, and it's not necessarily a conspiracy. That has been alleged. It has been far from proved, and it is not justified. Just my answer to my question to you is, I think the media is justified in reporting on this. I don't think it's justified for the media narrative to become, we think there was a cover-up. There's no evidence for that, as you were pointing out. All right. I want to tee up back to, again, VD, if it's not Victor David and I'm misrememberizing, just tell me. I want to get to his point. How did Chuck Rocha, convicted felon, stole money from a union, become a spokesman for the Democratic Party? Tell us, Matt. I don't know. I don't think he's an official, unless I've missed an update. I don't know that he has an official position since he ran for DNC chair. But the answer is, I don't know. And I don't know the specifics of his case. And I think that, VD, you're bringing up an important point here, which is, I don't think Democrats should be afraid of and try to hide from things that are weak points, things that are, questionable. You can get away with that a little bit. And I'm going to turn this into a question to you, Mark, I swear. I think that there is a bit of a tendency based on everything we've learned from communications professionals over the recent decades, to think that in order to win in the political sphere, you have to be talking about the topics that are winning topics for your side. Any time spent talking defensively, if you're defending, you're losing. If you're explaining, you're losing. If you're talking about the other side, you're losing. And I think that fear and that generally good advice has pervaded all of our brains. And so we've become so reluctant to give any oxygen to stories like this that we run scared from them. So my answer to VD is, I think you should be, to quote the movie The Right Stuff, forthright, gracious, and magnanimous, and say, yeah, I'm not sure about that. That doesn't sound great. Maybe he did his time and he's reformed and he's gone on to do good things in his life. And I'm not going to hold this against him. But I don't know. So anyway, do you see the same thing, Mark, where there's this reluctance in politics to engage in any topic for fear that it's going to feed into the other side's narrative?
Yeah, that really is a problem. I think you have to just try to be honest about it. Like after that horrible debate, where my heart sank when I saw that, it was like I just couldn't believe how bad it was. And then you have all these people saying, no, there's nothing to it. You have and really viciously attacking anyone who raised any questions, like, wow, that was a bad debate. Saying he had a bad night and stuff like that. It wasn't a bad night. He was just bad. And I just feel like like being truth oriented actually should have some advantages. I mean, the biggest liar in America is the president, so maybe I'm wrong about that. But I just have to think that being honest about things, including your own faults, has a benefit with decent people. Like, for example, Menendez, the Senator Menendez of New Jersey.
Oh, I thought you were talking about the Menendez brothers and the possibility that they'll be released from prison.
That's why I said senator, because I mean, a lot of Democrats, denounced him, and said he should get out of the Senate right away. And I mean, there was, I feel like the Democrats got some credit, or some credit at least, because they were trying to weed out the bad actors in their own party. Same thing with Cuomo. I mean, there's got to be a benefit to that, and we all can get better. I mean, it's this idea that this is, I think, part of the problem, Matt, is that if you get to this kind of sharks and jets thing where everyone is like on one side or the other side, and the facts don't matter anymore. That's where MAGA is right now. They are actively ignoring facts, and they don't want to know any facts. That's why when the defense secretary gives military attack plans to a reporter, his wife, and his brother, it's no big deal. It's because they're not interested in facts anymore. They're on that team. They're on Team Red. That's all they care about. Don't bother me with any facts. Well, we shouldn't be that way. I mean, we're supposed to be we being the Democratic Party. And I don't consider myself a party member. I kind of consider myself an independent. But honestly, the Democratic Party is really just about the only hope to stop authoritarianism right now. And
we're supposed to be the party of truth.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, I think that goes hand in hand. I mean, with free speech and free thought and difference of opinion. And that doesn't mean that, one of the things I really push right now is being good allies. And that means, to me, that if you disagree with somebody 90% of the time, but you agree with them, if you just disagree with them 10% and you agree with them 90%, then they're your ally, and you shouldn't just backbite them. You shouldn't just be, and you see a lot of this circular firing squad stuff in the Democratic Party. I don't want to be a part of that, but that's different to me from just saying obvious truths that in an attempt to make the Democratic Party more effective and more credible in America. And part of that is recognizing what happened here with Biden. And I'd love to talk. Can I just add something? Just maybe
please.
Slight detour. The Democrats faced a really difficult decision in 2024, and I can understand why people who backed Biden might have encouraged him to run for a second term. He shouldn't have. I think it's pretty obvious he shouldn't have. But I see why they did, because if he didn't run, you would have had an open primary. Kamala would have run, and she might not have won. She might have won. I think she actually, frankly, I think she ran a really good race, even though she was put in a tough position. But let's say she didn't win. Somebody like Gretchen Whitmer or something like some other person, who knows, won the nomination. I think there was a great fear that you would lose one of your most important voting blocks, which is Black Americans, if Kamala didn't get the nod. And that's a rational thing, and I could see why, again, just to be really emphasize it, Black people, especially Black women, have been the most dependable and important demographic group, not only supporting the Democratic Party, but supporting democracy in the last few years. And so to piss them off might have been a bad idea. And so let's say that Kamala doesn't get the nomination. Do they all stay home? I think that was a great fear, that they didn't have a natural successor, or that people wouldn't have embraced Kamala Harris as that successor. Now, as it turned out, when they finally got Biden out of the race, Kamala Harris was immediately embraced as a successor. And I think there was a lot of enthusiasm. Obviously not enough. Too many people stayed home. But I think, I'm not sure that was a valid fear, but I think it was a real fear. And I think that there were a lot of Democrats felt like it was just too risky to not run Biden a second time. And I could see why they thought that way. It turned out to be a gigantic mistake.
There's a ton of 2020 hindsight happening right now. I mean, you and I talked through, at the time, we weren't both substacking quite as much, but you and I talked throughout this period about the decisions in front of us. And, you could see, again, I'm guessing a little bit. I'm interpreting a little bit. I'm trying to use Occam's razor to it, partly as a corrective to what I see as a runaway media narrative about this, that you could see, without throwing Steve Rusceni and Mike Donnellan under the bus necessarily. Maybe they made horrible mistakes. I don't know. But you could see how people around the president could reason to themselves, look, he is our best chance. We need to defeat this threat of authoritarianism, of fascism. We need to stop Donald Trump. That is mission number one. And Joe Biden is our best chance to do that. And it sure seems to us that when it counts, he's able to perform. And you just see that kind of thing. I'll give you another example. When I was in graduate school, I was at the Kennedy School of Government. And one of my mentors was Dave Gergen, the former CNN commentator. He worked for 4 presidents, for Republicans and for Democrats, back when that was a thing. Mm-hmm. And one of his jobs, one of the people he worked for, was Ronald Reagan. And he told us openly that at the time, they were instituting a number of steps to try to support Ronald Reagan in his growing dementia. They recognized it. For example, when he traveled to Reykjavik for a summit meeting with Mikhail Gorbachev, they brought his entire bedroom, or duplicates thereof, everything in his bedroom, and they reset it up in exactly the same place, lest he get confused. Now, that is an implicit recognition that the leader of the free world is cognitively compromised. But you could see how they justified to themselves, like, look, he still gave that Mr. Gorbachev tear down this wall speech back in 1987. I mean, you could see how, I'm not excusing Ronald Reagan, believe me, but you could see how the people around him could justify to themselves. And, he told us another story, which is that Reagan would frequently get confused before speeches, but he had so much training, so much comfort as an actor, that when he saw his own image reflected back to him, the TV image next to the teleprompter, he would snap to. And he recalled the time, Gergen, where Reagan, right before a national address, saw his own picture in the TV screen, said, oh, there he is. He recognized himself where he had not been prior to that. So You know, again, I think that there's, I want to pick on the media for just one more second here. I'm going to see, this is a little game that I like to call, have I been trained by Mark Jacob well? Because I read Stop the Presses. I watch your show. People should all subscribe. I got to put up, I don't know if Jim can pop up that comment again. Here it is. I want to put your info up because I want people to subscribe to Stop the Presses. This is the best media analysis you're going to get anywhere on earth. So I want to read 2 sentences to you. Well, maybe it's 4 sentences. They're short sentences from the New York Times review of this book. And I just want to see what you think about the very subtle and not so subtle editorial choices that are being made here. All right, this is the New York Times. Here we go. You like to do this, and you're so much better at this than I am. But here we go. On the evening of June 27th, 2024, Democratic voters watched the first presidential debate in amazement and horror. No problems thus far. A red-faced Donald Trump let loose a barrage of audacious whoppers while Biden, slack-jawed and pale, struggled to string together intelligible rebuttals. Trump's debate performance was of a piece with his rallies, a jumble of nonsensical digressions and wild claims. But for many Americans, the extent of Biden's frailty came as a shock. Mark, this reminds me of George Carlin's routine about shell shock versus post-traumatic stress disorder. Mm-hmm. You add highfalutin terms with more syllables to obscure the plain English of what you're saying. Can I rephrase back? Here's what my editor's pen would do. Now, I'm going to ask you, have I been well trained by Mark Jacob? I would look at a barrage of audacious whoppers and say, I would say, why can't we call these nonstop, bold-faced lies?
We should. I think we're waiting for Matt to come back.
Well, that's delightful. Apparently, the New York Times heard that I was criticizing them, and they decided to break in and interrupt the live stream. Thanks, New York Times. Yes, exactly, Jim. Oh no, Matt, I don't know. I guess I had a little mental lacuna there, along with my my technology. So, right, why can't you say bald-faced lies, right? And why make the assessment Biden slack-jawed and pale? This seems like leading the witness. Okay, let's play the game. How did I do, Mark? What else stands out?
I think slack-jawed and pale is fair. In fact, he looked like he was going to fall down. So I think but my favorite New York Times-ism, as far as their inability to call a lie, is when they said that Vivek Ramaswamy had a penchant for dispensing with the facts. How about that? He just had a penchant for dispensing with the facts. In other words, lied. But the funny thing is, I'm an old time newspaper guy. Used to write a lot of headlines, and when you have a word like lie, you love it because it fits in almost any headline if you're writing it for print. And but New York Times hates that word. I mean, they'll use it occasionally. They will use it to describe Trump and his lie about the 2020 election. They have decided to do that, but beyond that, they won't use the word lie for hardly anything else. And he's lying all the time. I mean, and here I was just watching him on when he visited Congress today, and it's this nonstop string of lies. And and I was watching MSNBC. What did they do about it? Nothing. They didn't correct any of the lies. It was just one after another. It was that's just baked in. They've decided that the president of the United States is allowed to lie whenever he wants and not get corrected, which is just dangerous because, then there's no difference between lies and truth. And, so that's a big problem. And I remember thinking in the coverage of that debate, I mean, really, how it is. It's, Pat and Matt, it's kind of okay, Mrs. Lincoln, did you enjoy the play? If one thing is so stupendously shocking, nothing else seems to matter. And I understand that's why the news media may have covered, the debate that way. But the truth is, it was a horrible presentation by Trump too. Trump had a terrible debate. He just didn't have as terrible one as his opponent.
Right. He had the second worst debate in American history.
Yeah. Well, and
right.
the thing about it, he's I can't think of except for the early 2024 and I mean early 2016 and 2015 debates when he was there against a row of other Republican candidates. Once you got beyond that, he doesn't win any debates. He didn't win any of the debates against Hillary Clinton. He's not a good debater. He's because he lies and he wants to say what he wants to say, but he doesn't, address the issues. And the more, if there's any fact checking whatsoever, he loses because he gets fact checked. But that's why he hates fact checking and why he tries to strong arm news media into not allowing fact checking at his appearances. So yeah, so it's interesting your description of the New York Times or the New York Times description of the debate. Kind of true, I think, except for they could have just called them lies. You're right, whoppers. And the thing about it, when you use the word like whoppers, you're kind of turning into something kind of
cute.
Yeah, it's kind of. Oh well, there's Uncle Joe and his whoppers again. It's
here you go again.
Yeah, it's this endearing quality, sort of. It's, I mean, and this is actually my big problem in the New York Times, which I've written about a lot. Is just they tend to like entertainment value, and therefore they tend to give Trump style points for being entertaining, even if he's destroying this country. It's one of those things where they just want to tell a good story. So, by the way, he's trying to destroy the country, but boy, isn't he doing it in an entertaining way.
Yeah, he tells some good jokes. I mean, even Andrew Sullivan in his most recent Friday Substack wrote well, you can't deny that he can be very funny sometimes. It's like, sure, okay. Granted, by the way, I'm just flashing up on the screen again. For people who are interested in this kind of analysis, it's so interesting to me when you start reading your work, Mark. What you find is you can't unsee these things, and then they become more and more obvious to you in your reading in the world around you. And I don't want to step on your most recent edition. The headline on Stop the Presses is MAGA is the ventriloquist. Some media are the dummies. The subhead is words come out of Republicans' mouths and go into news reports unfiltered. And it's just chock full of the kind of analysis that we were just doing here. After RFK was nominated as HHS secretary, an NPR headline cast him in heroic terms. RFK Jr. wants to make America healthy again. He could face a lot of pushback. I'm not going to go into the rest of what you described there, but I'm sure our viewers and our listeners can already begin to spring on the many problems here. So I really commend that to everyone.
Could I just highlight one of the things I mentioned in that newsletter?
Please.
And because it's so relevant now with the Medicaid stuff coming up. They had what's his name? They had that Vern Buchanan of Florida, the representative. They wrote a story in early April. He appeared at a Politico event, so I think they were going to give him easy treatment because he showed up at their event. And they give him a headline that says top House Republican doesn't want to cut Medicaid, and they quote him as saying, I'm not for any cuts in Medicaid. Well, all right. And he said he was going to, they really were going to solve the budget problem by going after Medicaid's inefficiencies. All right. Well, that's an old time. Republicans have been saying for years that, well, we're going to cut waste, and that's how we're going to, instead when they're actually cutting bone, they're, and that's been kind of this dodge that they do over and over. Politico, they're political reporters. They know that if they decide to let him say something like that and let it go as if it's true, they're complicit. They're part of the whole problem. And look what's happening now. So this Buchanan guy, who's not for any cuts in Medicaid, is now, completely behind this big, beautiful bill that's going to knock at least, about 7 million people off of Medicaid. So this is not, Matt, this is not just, the media got tricked. This is the media allowing itself to it's being complicit. They know he's lying. They're helping him lie. It's all part of a game. He shows up at their event. They get a headline. I mean, it's the most unsavvy thing possible for it. And this is a website, a news outlet that's 100% in favor of. That their job is politics.
Right. And I'm just flashing this cartoon up on the screen. I mean, that is really the issue that I think makes this all so hard is, let's not forget who the moderator of that debate was, right? Yeah. That there's, if the media is suddenly in, it's like Samuel L. Jackson in Pulp Fiction, I will strike down upon thee with great vengeance and furious anger, since you misled us. I can't believe no one called us out on the lies. Hello. What was your job this whole time? I do find that pretty rich. And I think all we're trying to get at here is, and what your Substack, I think, does brilliantly, is get at, there are constant, even if you are dedicated to being balanced, to being truthful, to presenting the facts, to letting readers judge, you're constantly making choices about phrasing and context and euphemizing and, taking out your thesaurus to find ways not to say the word lie. Right. And it's, that's something we can't escape, that the media is equally complicit in this. And it's not, again, it just takes me back to that Politico quote, that there's this media narrative now forming. Oh, really? You get to make this narrative? That's convenient for you. All right. I want to talk.
That's in that 5 guys sitting in a bar in DC. Is that it?
Yes.
That's the media narrative has formed.
Yes, exactly. And nothing we can do about it, right? Like the media, we're not. Well, it has formed. I love the passive voice in that too. It's like,
that's what I had a column recently where I talked about critics say and observers claim, and how you can like stick things into news stories without attributing them to anyone, just saying, and how you can diminish actual facts by putting critics say in order to just make them safer. Right now, Matt, one of the big problems of the news media is being safe. That's why New York Times has what I call its euphemism desk, where they run every story past the chief euphemizer at the New York Times, and he comes up with a penchant for dispensing with the facts. And it's out of safety, and the thing that's really most important, and maybe one of the biggest takeaways of my entire newsletter, is that what's safe for the news media is very dangerous for the country. And so the more they play it safe, the more we're imperiled.
I love that idea. Instead of the New York Times pitch bot, we should get the New York Times euphemism bot.
Right.
Take like the original plain English George Carlin shell shock. I'm sorry, I made a reference there that probably went over most people's head. George Carlin, one of the most brilliant observers of language of the 20th or any century, had this bit on, we used to use the term shell shock, very direct, very hit you at a gut level, 2 syllables. Then we changed it to battle fatigue, 4 syllables. You're not shocked, you're fatigued. Then it became post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm counting syllables and I'm coming up short. I think that's 8 syllables. 8 syllables. So we're seeing geometric growth there, and we're obscuring the plain English meaning of it. He was on a par with Orwell when it came to deconstructing language. All right. Speaking of deconstructing language, I want to switch gears just a tiny bit and talk about the Democrats' side of this. Now, you are a professional engaged in media analysis, not necessarily Democratic political strategy. However, and this is where I'd like to invite people in the comments to please weigh in, even more than you already are. I guess as a jumping off point, I can use Gary Kasparov's piece on Substack this morning, where he essentially, I'm not going to use his exact wording, but he essentially says, all right, Democrats, just come right out and say, you know what? We fouled up. We made a mistake. We should have seen the signs. We had the best of intentions. We were trying to fight an autocrat. We were so afraid of all the things that Donald Trump is doing right now that we didn't use our best judgment. And we had such affection for everything Joe Biden had accomplished that we let that cloud us. We're sorry. We messed that up, but we have to move forward. That there needs to be some responsibility and mea culpa. Anyone who's ever been in a relationship, reaches this point where they have to say, like, that was my fault. I take responsibility. Sometimes it may not have even been fully your responsibility. It seems like, again, like I alluded to a moment ago, in this day and age, we've become so afraid in the politics sphere of doing anything that creates an opening for the other side, that underscores your opponent's narrative, that builds their case for them. But it seems like the way out of the prisoner's dilemma, the princess bride dilemma, the which glass of wine do you drink from, is to say, all right, we're going to take our medicine and we're going to acknowledge there was a fault here. There was a mistake here. And we gotta be forthright about it. What do you make of that?
I think that's exactly the right thing to do. And, unfortunately, we're in a situation where the more highly educated people are more likely to be Democratic. I mean, that's been proven in polls, in exit polls, et cetera. The less educated people tend to vote for Republicans, especially for Trump. And I think sophisticated people, or people who have been just exposed to more information, they're okay with that. They're okay with someone saying, "Well, I thought that was true, but it was wrong. I was wrong. This is right," or "I've learned this from that." That's what grown-ups do. But it's people who are more easily fooled by propaganda who don't ever want that. Who still are insisting that Mexico's paying for the wall and stuff like that. I mean, it's where there's no attempt. Trump doesn't apologize. I mean, he thinks everything he does he's insisting everything he does is right, and the Democrats are Marxist demons. And I think for his audience, as I say, a kind of low information audience, that works. But if you want to get, Americans who are sophisticated and care about the future of this country engaged, you can't be that way. You have to be grown-ups about it. And grown-ups make mistakes. Grown-ups own up to their mistakes. And I think it's super important for Democrats to be that way.
It's the number one thing I try to teach my kids is start by taking responsibility. I'd rather that you foul up and that you tell me about it. And, then we can deal with it. We can deal with almost anything if we treat it as a problem and, a consequence of human fallibility. I want to touch on one other politics topic here, and then I'm going to hit you with a major curveball. Oh boy. We haven't talked yet about President Biden's cancer diagnosis, and there have been some comments about it here. And it sets up, I think it's linked to this question of, should Democrats just be really forthright about this? And I alluded to Dave Gergen earlier. And one of the things, again, that he related, I can't remember if it was to me. I was his teaching assistant for a while. Can't remember if he was telling me or telling the class. Doesn't really matter. That he had advised then President Bill Clinton that the rule when you have a scandal about to break, when you have bad news, is it's a 3-part rule. Get it out, get it all out, get it out yourself. And I think that there's been a decent amount of reporting about the fact that Bill Clinton was a lawyer. Hillary Clinton was a lawyer. They were surrounded by a lot of lawyers. And there was a debate when the Whitewater stuff was morphing into the Lewinsky stuff about how to handle it. And they went with the legalistic approach rather than the communications approach. Mm-hmm. I think that was a mistake. We'll never know. We'll never be able to rerun that and know. But now we're in a situation where not only is the forming media narrative that there was a cover-up, but also you have this reveal that President Biden has an advanced metastasized form of prostate cancer. And amidst the initial outpouring of sympathy, which is good, and Donald Trump's remarkably, shockingly normal human response to it, which was shocking, which lasted for like 2 minutes. And then he went to, but while we're talking about this, the conspiracy theories started. But I have to say, there is a little bit of a credibility problem now for the people around Joe Biden when it comes to being fully forthright about his health. So what do you, Mark, make of Dave Gergen's advice and this situation around his health status? If there is more of a story here, should they get it all out themselves right now?
Oh, for sure. And I don't know that there is any more of a story than, to me, his new illness is I just take it at face value. I don't see any benefit to, what benefit does Joe Biden have now? He's done. His career's done. So I don't think that there's any vast conspiracy there. But as far as getting it all out at the start, I 100% agree with that. And I saw it from the other side as an editor who edited political stories, for big newspapers. We would sometimes be amazed that somebody would let their own scandal kind of drip, drip, drip on them. And the phrase we used is that they're turning a 1-day story into a 5-day story, and that happened. You saw that all the time. It just, they would try to cover it up, and then there'd be a leak of this, and then the next day there'd be another bit of evidence, then another bit, and they were just being pecked to death because they wouldn't just come out and be straight with it. So that's what I'm saying, Matt, is that's why I think the Democrats, I want them to be better than Republicans. I want them to come out and be honest and be forthright about everything. And it's a political benefit, really. It's not just that it's the right thing to do. It is the right thing to do, but there's a political benefit to it because, you get it out. Don't look evasive. You don't look like you're trying to cover anything up, and you also make a 1-day story a 1-day story instead of a 5-day story. I mean, it's good. It's both the right thing to do, and it's good business.
And my experience with reporters and editors from the political operative side of it is that they'll let you make the pivot if you've acknowledged and you seem to have been fully forthcoming about your weak points first. I had this happen with Paul when I was working for him. There was an allegation that he had misused voter file information to send mail, political mail. And I was getting some advice from the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, which was essentially the 5 Ds of dodgeball: dip, dive, dodge, dip, and dodge. And I took it, and I had some enraged reporters and some enraged editors and some actual shouting matches. And I'm like, you know what? This is not working, and I'm not going to do it anymore. So I called them back, and I said, all right, I'm sorry. I've taken the wrong approach with this. If you would like, please ask your reporter to call me, and I will give absolutely every piece of information I have. And we did it that way, and I provided it, and I provided the context. And was it all good for my boss? No, it wasn't all good. Was there a story that I was trying to prevent? Because, you never want them talking about the topic. You don't want them to. Yes, there was. I had to take that hit. But the reporter was a mensch and included our side of it. And the boil was lanced, and it was over, and we moved on. And, so anyway, all right.
And probably your next conversation on a totally different subject with those people went a lot better.
It absolutely did. And look, reporters talk to each other too. Yeah. At the time, there was a whole press bureau. It was in the State House in New Hampshire. These guys, well, mostly guys, some gals, these gals and guys sat literally 2 feet from each other. They're sometimes having these conversations in earshot of one another. They get off the phone. It's yeah, that was Matt Robeson, and this is what it is, and of course they're saying that after they've, filed their story. But, these things go around. This person is a straight shooter. This person is not. And I think there's such a temptation to, just stonewall fight. And sometimes you have to do that, right? Like sometimes, you're under, I worked for a politician who had come under the eye of the spotlight team for the Boston Globe. And I had some pretty contentious, back and forths with them. There's not much you can do about that. But ultimately, again, I go back to, I agree with Cliff Schechter. I think that the decision to write this book this way, it's fair game for journalists, but it's awfully convenient for covering up the media's culpability in this. And there's a real danger of it serving as a weapon of mass distraction. All of those things are true. And now Democrats just need to treat it as something that we wish were not, but is. This is the world we have to deal with. So now we have to go right at it.
But also you can say last year's news.
Right. Let's deal. Right. Exactly. Let's deal with this now in the year of our Lord 2025 and not next year when we have a chance, if there's an election, of taking back the House and, maybe at least making things tough in the Senate. All right. I want to say a few things. I'm going to switch gears very briefly here. So I'm going to say to people before we lose them, because I'm going to switch gears for just like 2 minutes. I have a surprise question for Mark. If people are here just for the politics and the media analysis, I don't want to lose them without saying, I hope you will consider subscribing to Stop the Presses. Mark Jacobs' outstanding Substack. It is well worth it. And it's just a fun thing to get. Just scan it. And it's like media training that you get like off the shelf once a week, twice a week. How often do you publish? Twice a week?
Well, once a week, and then I do a video with Stephen Beschloss, every other week sometimes. But mostly I write.
It just trains your brain.
Yeah, but it's at Stop the Presses, all one word, .news is the easiest way to get to it.
Stopthepresses.news. And again, it's like once I'm not saying that people should subscribe and then unsubscribe, but like once you start seeing things the Mark Jacob way, it's amazing. Like you just notice so much more in the media, and it's well worthwhile. And I hope while you're at it in the subscribing business, you'll consider subscribing to Worth Knowing, my Substack, which thank you very much, by the way, people. It has been growing very, very well over my first 6 weeks in operation, and I appreciate it. I really appreciate everyone for following and subscribing. Okay, here's the curveball. What people may not know is that Mark Jacob, with his brother, I mean, gosh, like I don't know, like I would love to reach a point in life where I felt like writing a book with my sibling. That's amazing. With his brother, wrote a book about Abe Saperstein called Globetrotter: How Abe Saperstein Shook Up the World of Sports. It's a remarkable history of the guy who ran the Harlem Globetrotters and is responsible for a tremendous amount of innovation in basketball. So, ready? Here we go. The curveball for you is, since Abe Saperstein was probably responsible ultimately for the creation of the three-point line, do you think, now that we're in the NBA playoffs, that the NBA needs to make rule changes and specifically adjust the three-point line?
That's good. I haven't been asked that question. I'd like to pull it back a little bit because right now it's at like 40% of shots in the NBA are three-point shots. That seems like too many to me. I would like to see, and it's become this. In the book, I interviewed former DePaul University coach Joey Meyer, and he pointed out that, on a fast break now, instead of like going to the hoop, people are stopping at the three-point line even on fast breaks, waiting for a pass. And, I don't like that. So I guess I would just move it back. The Globetrotters are still around and they have a 4-point shot. Did you know that?
Oh my gosh, I did not know that.
It's at the 30-foot line.
Well, I've actually seen some analysis. Oh my gosh, I should play my little prefabbed clip. Okay, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do this. I'm going to do my little prefab clip. You ready? This is 7 seconds that you'll never get back in your life. Here we go.
Nerd alert!
It was my understanding that there would be no math.
I don't even know what that means.
Oh, it's not running.
No one knows what it means, but it's provocative.
So this is the nerd alert moment. I've seen some analysis on this. 30 feet is about right, because what you want is strategically for teams to be relatively mathematically indifferent between attacking close to the basket, shooting from the 3-point line, or shooting from a 4-point line. You want the math exercise of it to be about even, so that you're not putting your thumb on the scale one way or the other and distorting the game. And things have gotten just a little bit out of whack, as much as I admire Joe Mazzulla.
Yeah, I think so too.
All right. That was a very, very fun digression. I will leave on just one more nerd alert. You know what really bugs me during the NBA playoffs is you always get to game 5 and some wise announcer will say, did you know that the team that wins game 5 wins the series 82% of the time? And I feel like screaming at the television. Like, this is one of those numbers that's true and somewhat informative, but where the media is once again not really explaining things right. Because yes, that's called very, very basic math. Like, if you win game 5, then you only have to win once and the other team has to win twice. And if you do the math, that's exactly the percentage. You would expect that 75% of the time, the team that wins game 5 would win the series. And lo and behold, there's all kinds of reasons why it should be a little bit higher than that. It's a number that sort of tells you something, but sort of tells you nothing.
No, the more you think about it, the less impressed you are. I know what you mean.
Exactly. Well, the more I listen to you, the more impressed I am. And I hope people will check out Stop the Presses on Substack and Worth Knowing on Substack. And Mark Jacob, thanks so much for being part of this discussion.
Well, thanks for having me. It was fun.
All right. Well, absolute pleasure. And preview for people next week, next Tuesday, we have another outstanding former reformed media member, one of the true experts on foreign policy on earth. And we have a surprise guest popping in. Okay, it's not that much of a surprise. I'm pretty sure Cliff's going to be popping in for next week as well. So those of you who have just been putting up with me, nose held, you may get your RDA of Cliff Schechter. And if you're preferring me, then you can hold your nose during that segment. All right. So we will see you all next week. Thanks to Mark Jacob, and be well, everyone.